Before starting the story, let us know where you're watching from and what time you're watching. Hunted by Shadows. Prologue. Darkness had always been a comfort to Ethan. He wasn't afraid of the night like others were. But he had never encountered a darkness like this. A darkness that breathed. A darkness that watched. A darkness that hunted. It started on the night he moved into the old house in Black Hollow, a small town nestled between dense forests and endless stretches of fog. The house was cheap, suspiciously cheap, but he didn't ask questions. He was desperate for a fresh start. He should have asked questions. Chapter 1. The Whispering Dark. The first night was uneventful, except for the winds that howled through the trees like distant voices calling out. Ethan dismissed it, blaming his overactive imagination. It wasn't until the second night that he realized something was wrong. It began as a whisper, a faint, almost imperceptible murmur coming from the corners of his room. He sat up in bed, heart pounding, and listened. The whispers grew louder, but he couldn't make out the words. They swirled like static in the air, an unsettling sound that made his skin crawl. "Just the winds," he muttered. "Just the old house settling." But deep down, he knew better. Chapter 2. Shadows in the corners. Ethan began noticing them, the shadows that moved. They weren't natural. Shadows weren't supposed to shift when there was no movement, no change in light. Yet, from the corner of his eye, he saw them creeping along the walls, flickering just beyond the reach of his vision. One evening, while reading in his dimly lit living room, he caught a glimpse of something darting past the doorway. A chill ran down his spine. He turned, expecting to see a trick of the light, but there was nothing. "Just tired," he told himself. But sleep didn't come easy that night. The whispers were louder, and the shadows, they were closer. Chapter 3. The first encounter. The third night was when everything changed. Ethan had dozed off on the couch, exhausted from unpacking. A sudden cold swept through the room, yanking him awake. His breath hitched as he saw it, an impossibly dark shadow standing at the foot of the couch. It wasn't a shape cast by furniture or a trick of the dim lighting. It was something else, something alive. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he was frozen in place. The shadow didn't move. It only stood there, an abyss in the shape of a man, watching him. And then it whispered. A rasping voice, like wind through dry leaves, filled the air. "We see you." Ethan bolted upright. The shadow melted into the darkness of the room as if it had never been there. Chapter 4. No escape. By the next day, Ethan was exhausted. The whispers and shadows followed him wherever he went. He kept the lights on, but it didn't matter. The darkness still clung to the edges, waiting. He tried to leave. He grabbed his keys and suitcase, rushing to the door, but the moment his fingers touched the handle, the entire house went pitch black. Not just dark, utterly, suffocatingly black. His breath came in ragged gasps as he fumbled for his phone's flashlight. The second he turned it on, the shadows fled from its glow, but they didn't disappear. They lingered at the edges of the light, watching, waiting for it to go out. A whisper came from directly behind him. "You belong to us now." Chapter 5. The truth. Desperate, Ethan searched for answers. He visited the town's library, poring over old records. What he found made his blood run cold. Black Hollow had a history of disappearances. People vanishing without a trace, all of them from the same house Ethan now lived in. The story spoke of shadows that moved on their own, of whispers in the dark, of people who tried to escape, only to be swallowed by the void. The last recorded tenant before Ethan was a woman named Margaret Holloway. She had written in her journal, "They are not ghosts. They are not demons. They are the dark itself. They hunger for light. They feed on fear. And once they see you, they never stop hunting." Margaret had disappeared, just like the others. Chapter 6. The final stand. Ethan had one chance. He needed to escape before the shadows consumed him entirely. He packed his things, making sure his flashlight had fresh batteries. The sun was setting as he stood at the door, heart hammering in his chest. He turned the knob. The darkness came instantly, faster than before, swallowing the room whole. He turned on his flashlight, but the beam flickered as if the shadows were draining the power. He bolted for the door, pushing against an unseen force that resisted him, like wading through thick, invisible tar. The shadows lunged, tendrils of darkness reaching for his limbs, wrapping around his ankles. He screamed, thrashing, his flashlight clattering to the floor. The last thing he saw before the light sputtered out was a dozen eyes blinking open within the darkness. Then, silence. Epilogue. Days later, the town sheriff visited the house after neighbors reported the front door wide open. Inside, he found Ethan's belongings scattered, his suitcase still packed. But Ethan was gone. No sign of a struggle. No note. Just a single sentence scrawled into the dust-covered floorboards. They are watching. The house remains empty to this day. The whispers continue. The shadows still wait. And the next tenant? They won't be so lucky.